Hi, welcome to I Tried to Eat My Phone. I am joined today by two awesome friends, Ken and Will, and we've known each other for over 20 years. And yeah, sorry,
Oh,
math, but we have.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and um, we're going to talk about sports today. I want to start off by asking both of you, so NCAA football, does this season count? Is
Only if
there an
Notre
is
Dame.
there an asterisk, or like I said, to quote Shafu, is it a tainted win? Like, are we? I mean, is this real or just for fun?
Well, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah. So I I think it's going to be very tough to name a champion this year, right? So Notre Dame, as an example, has played what, 8 games,
Mm-hmm.
7 games. I'm not sure, but I saw a team. I saw USC and Utah were playing last night, and it was Utah's first game. So, well, they lost, but okay. So USC is 3-0. At best, they're going to play maybe 6 games. Notre Dame may play 12, and so or other ACC teams. So um, Alabama just had like a 3 week bye because of all these games getting canceled. So I think the decision of which teams are going to be qualified. I mean, if Ohio State plays 5 games and are 5-0, do they belong in the playoff?
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. So I, will it count? Yes, I think it will. I think there's too much money at stake to not make it count and not do a
Mm-hmm.
playoff. So it will happen. Um, so it's going to be kind of like the baseball season. I mean, they kind of played half a season, and the Dodgers won, and they got the title. So um, it's going to be odd. And if I mean, like if Notre Dame won, that's a team I like. I'll take it, but
Mm-hmm.
it won't feel quite the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's hard to deny like that I'll have an asterisk on the season in my mind. Um, should if Notre Dame were to run the table and continue to win. I mean, if they were, I mean, they beat Clemson. They beat the number one team in the country, but Clemson was out there without their starting quarterback, their all
Yeah, it was
world
like
quarterback.
the biggest guy in football. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Now, I mean, the guy that replaced him threw for 450 yards. He played
Mm-hmm.
a great game. So would Trevor Lawrence have made the difference? I probably. I don't know. So, I mean, if Notre Dame should play them again, and then if Notre Dame would beat them again with Trevor Lawrence, carries more weight, great.
Mm-hmm.
But I just everything is different. I mean, having games in these stadiums with no fans or few fans, um, it just feels so much different. I know the first couple games of the season did especially, and even now, like when I watch the broadcast, I think they're piping in crowd noise, or that's what it seems to be, because I'm like, the whatever 3 or 4 thousand people that are there can't be making that much noise. So it just feels very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think college football more so even than NFL football, because I think in college football the experience of having the fans there and playing games on campus, and I think that the sense of ownership, if that's the right word, the sense of attachment that you have to a program is stronger than maybe that exists in the NFL. And I say that as I'm wearing a Steeler shirt, but I mean that's kind of the way that I feel. And so without people in the stands, I do think it's just different.
Yeah. Are
Yeah, it's
you?
interesting. Like I think the NFL, like I agree with Ken. I don't have the same feeling about the NFL. I
Mhm.
feel like maybe because they're paid professionals, like whether there's crowd, people in the stands or not, like I think that quality of play is probably still the same. But I think college games, I think the crowd noise probably has more of a factor potentially on teams. And so, yeah, that's that's a difference in my mind. So I wouldn't have an asterisk on the NFL season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. And that's not to say that, the attachment that people feel for an NFL team isn't as strong as college. I did maybe kind of say that previously, but I mean, growing up as a Steeler fan, I mean, my fandom runs deep, and my kids, who are 15 and 13, I mean, my 13-year-old doesn't really enjoy 12-year-old. We're gonna have to edit that out. He's only 12. But my 12-year-old isn't really into sports. My 15-year-old is, and he is a huge Steeler fan. He's also a huge Notre Dame fan. But like, the Steeler fan in me, like I've had that. That's just kind of how I grew up. Like even going back to before I was a Notre Dame fan, I was a Steeler fan because that's where I grew up. And it's interesting. I was thinking about some of my memories with Will and the ones that revolve around sports. And in 1994, the Steelers were playing for the AFC Championship, and they were big favorites over the San Diego Chargers. And Will and I were heading back to college, and Will was coming from Montclair, New Jersey, and he was stopping to pick me up at my brother's house right near I-80 on the way back to Notre Dame. And he was there watching the Steelers lose a heartbreaking AFC Championship game on the 5-yard line. And he saw my probably 40-some-year-old brother on the floor, like pounding into the carpet.
I couldn't get out of that house fast enough.
and I was like I'm pretty upset, but I don't know if I that's a little much. But now I could totally see myself doing that. So I don't know. But anyway, sorry, that was kind of a long answer, but
no, that's all right. That kind of leads me to my next question about what do you think makes a good sports town? Like I was thinking, so my experience, growing up in East Lansing, I mean, obviously it was very college football based, like Michigan State, Michigan, the whole thing. And then Chicago, obviously huge sports town and stuff with professional sports. Like I was there when like it was big with like the Bulls were big. I was there near Wrigley when like it was the Sosa McGuire years, and like, there was a huge component to that. Then I moved to Seattle, and I remember thinking, why aren't they talking about sports here? Because like the news in Chicago was always like 10 minutes of news, 10 minutes of weather, and like 10 minutes of sports. And then I came out here and it was like 15 minutes of news, 10 minutes of weather, which our weather is
it's raining.
Benign.
It's raining.
Yeah.
It's
and
raining
then
and damp. Yeah.
Maybe like a minute of sports and then a feel-good story. And that was it. And I was like, what? What? Like, there's nothing. I will say it's changed. The trajectory has changed a little bit. Once the Seahawks went to the Super Bowl, it kind of picked up some speed, and we've got an NHL team now. We're maybe going to get, soccer's big. The Sounders are huge. So it's growing, but I was like fascinated by the fact that I was like, does anyone, I mean, I would tell people would be like, oh, what sports do you like or something like that? Or where did you go to school? And I'm like, Notre Dame. And they'd be like, in Paris. It's like, what? Like,
wow.
So it was like living in a different world.
Yeah.
So what do you think, like, what makes a good sports town? Like, what is a good sports town?
Well, I've lived in a few different, so I grew up outside of New York. So that was my only experience, and so New York is a kind of a different, it's such a big area and there's so many teams, right? So the allegiance to teams is sort of divided among the city. So you don't have, versus like a Pittsburgh where there's one NFL team, there's one hockey team, there's, 2 basketball teams, 3 hockey teams in New York, 2 NFL teams, 2 baseball teams. And there's people in New York that still like the Dodgers, because they left, years and years ago. And so it's a good town for sports because there's a lot of it. But I would say that passion and identity of the city behind a particular team is not the same. So I've lived in New York, I lived in Boston, and now I'm outside of Philly. I would say Boston and Philly are a little bit more, uh, they're similar in the sense that there's a ton of passion behind sports, but they're different. Like in Boston is a baseball city, which is funny because the Patriots have been so good for so long. But if you asked a fan from Boston, would they trade all those Patriots Super Bowls for Red Sox World Series wins? They would take the Red Sox every time. And
imagine how that would have been, say 15 years ago before the Red Sox started winning.
Right.
When they finally broke the streak.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is why 86 is still, I think, for a lot of people in Boston, it was still like, just so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So sorry, Bob.
And no, and so in Philly, it's kind of the same way, but it's an NFL town. It's Eagles are above all, and so it's I would say what makes a good sports city is that there's sort of passion and identity around the sports teams and things like that. And I think these cities have it, though it's very focused on one team, it seems. So I don't know. Chicago might be a good example of where there's sort of, a lot of interest and passion behind all the teams. I don't really know, if it's how the teams rank in Chicago, and certainly Pittsburgh is maybe a close example of this, because certainly with the Steelers and the Penguins, if the Pirates were better, I'm sure they'd have a lot of support too. But it's probably been very hard to be a Pirates fan. But I would say, so probably those middle-sized cities, I think, would probably be better sports towns than the metropolis of a New York.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, having lived in, grown up in Pittsburgh and now living in Chicago, Pittsburgh, blue collar city, on the smaller side as far as cities go. So obviously not big enough to support more than one team per sport. And so, it's like all of the energy is focused on the Steelers during football season. And then when it's hockey season, all of the energy is focused on the Penguins. And then during baseball season, all of the energy is focused on how long is it going to be until Steelers training camp starts. People just, I think that, it's a football town in the time that I really remember. In the 70s, when I was born, the Steelers were winning Super Bowls and the Pirates were winning World Series, in the same year, which is crazy because you didn't have the market disparities that you have now. I get the sense that even then it was probably more of a Steeler, a Steeler town, but people were certainly more interested in the Pirates when they were playing better. I think that, when teams kind of embody the spirit of the city, I think that's something that really lends itself to this rabid fandom. If the Steelers in the 70s were like the 49ers of the 80s, where they were winning games with offense and they were kind of flashy, I don't know that it would have captivated the city the same way. The Steelers won in the 70s because of their defense. And I think, when you've got a defense that it just really sort of captured the blue collar nature of the city. It was like, these guys are just going to come out, they're going to work hard. A lot of them have gone into the Hall of Fame, but it wasn't like a lot of flash. It was, it was really more about just embodying the spirit and the nature of the people that went to the games. And I think the Penguins, the success that they've had over the last 20, 30 years, it's kind of similar. Like these guys, for as much money as they make, they still seem to be somewhat relatable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really helps to strengthen that, the connection that they have with the city. And so that's my experience, as far as Pittsburgh goes. And I'm a much bigger Pittsburgh sports fan than I am a Chicago sports fan, even though I've lived here longer.
Mm.
And when the kids were young and I was indoctrinating them, about the Steelers and the Pirates and the Penguins, and Rebecca always said, like, Ken, by the time the kids go to school, they might become like a Bears fan and a Cubs fan and a Blackhawks fan. And I said, that's totally fine. There's lots of other nice families on the street they can go to live with if they want. If they're going to live here, then they're going to be decked out from head to toe in black and gold. So that's kind of it's a non-starter in my opinion. But Chicago's a good sports town, but it is different. Like you've got kind of the split between the Cubs and the Sox. North side is Cubs,
Mm-hmm.
south side is Sox, with some exceptions. People do get pretty fired up about the Bears when they come
Mm-hmm.
together. I moved here after the Bulls, their run of 6 championships, which I know Will remembers very fondly as a huge Bulls fan.
Yes. Yeah.
So I kind of miss that. People certainly did get into the Blackhawks, and they won a couple of cups in the last 10 years. But I think Chicago often gets the reputation of being a great sports town, and it's good. I think there's a lot going on, so
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of hard not to get into it. So
yeah, that kind of speaks to what Will was saying too about, if you're in a town where there's just a lot of different teams and stuff, sometimes it's hard for, everyone's not on board with one particular team, and that kind of changes things up a little bit. I do think, I was there during the Bulls years, and I was always fascinated. I always thought if I ever went and got my PhD in psychology, I would study like fan psychology, like the idea, because people would be like partying in the streets and like, all that kind of stuff. And I was always fascinated with that. I was like, you didn't do anything, like, but it's your team, and I get it. And like, I was always so fascinated by that feeling of connection with a team. And yet at the same time, like, when we watched the Clemson game the other week, John and I were going bananas, and I was like, why do we care this much? But we did. It was like, I was so crazy and exciting and so up and down. And there is the fanaticism is always interesting to me, like
I think
in towns
and especially, when it comes to professional sports, where players change teams, and there's free agency and things like that. And I think it was on Seinfeld when they're like, what it comes down to is like, you're cheering for laundry, right? Because a player can change their jersey, and go to a different team, but you're just cheering for whoever is in that uniform. You're cheering for laundry.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Do both of you have like a sports memory, either growing up or either more recently, that like, what was something that was like a huge sports memory for you, like a shining moment thing where you were like, whoa, this is so cool? Like, whether it was someone winning a trophy or a certain play or whatever.
I vividly remember, and so when the Giants won against the Bills, Ken probably knows the year better than me, 1990, I believe.
yeah, I think it was.
So I was 15, 16 years old at the time. So I definitely have memories of sports before that, but that was the first time a team that I liked won something. So at that time, like a kid, I was am a Yankee fan too. At that time, like the Yankees in the 80s were dreadful. They lost 100 games a year routinely. and they were never good. So finally a team that I liked, the Giants, won, and in dramatic fashion in that game. So that was the one where Scott Norwood missed the field goal at the end of the game, and Giants won. So I vividly remember that. And then actually, Ken and I were roommates in Norwalk, Connecticut, when the Yankees finally won, and that was a similar dramatic moment. I mean, in my lifetime, like in my memory, the Yankees had never been good, and they finally won, and that was huge. So those are two, I guess, earlier moments
Yeah.
in my life. Yeah.
It's hard. I mean, because I've been fortunate to see some really awesome sports memories, like to see things live, like during that 96 season. I mean, I'm not a Yankee fan, but I was working in New York City, and my company had season tickets at Yankee Stadium, and so I got to go to game 1 of the American League Championship Series when the kid Jeffrey Meyer, they were playing the Orioles, and the kid reached over the fence and took a home run. Made a long fly ball, turned it into a home run, and I was at the game, and I watched Bernie Williams win that game in the 12th inning with a home run, and it was amazing to see it live. And certainly, I think the time that Will and I and you, Karen, obviously spent at Notre Dame, and the things that we got to see from during Notre Dame football, the highs and the lows were certainly awesome. I got to go to a Super Bowl, and watch the Steelers win, and saw it live, which was really cool. But then there's also some pretty deep lows that make you question, like, why am I getting so invested in this?
Yeah.
I mentioned that 94 AFC Championship game. 1992 Game 7 National League Championship Series. I mean, the Pirates, blew a lead in the 9th inning. Stan Belinda gave up a hit to Francisco Cabrera. Sid Bream scored from second base when Barry Bonds couldn't throw him out at the plate. I'm not bitter. It's only been 24 years.
The good thing is you're over it.
28 years. Sorry. I mean, I was a freshman at college, and I still remember watching that game in my dorm room and roommates jumping on me to taunt me, and it was all in good fun. But I'm like, I was so angry. So the highs are high, but the lows can feel so low.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, John and I were talking about the Snow Bowl when we were at Notre Dame, and just that moment. I mean, I think that was one of the most times the time I was most excited. Like, I mean, the next year, obviously we had a lot of cool stuff going on, but like that game, I just felt like it was just sort of magical against Penn State. Like that was exciting. And for me too, Cubs winning the World Series in 2016. I mean, that was and my grandmother passed away in 2017, so the next year, or 2018. Anyway, she always had a bumper sticker on her car that said "Die Hard Cubs fan." And I just remember thinking, she was, in her 90s when she passed away. And I just remember thinking, I was so glad that she got to see her Cubs win the World Series. Like that was a monumental moment, like was really, really cool. So, yeah. And I mean, just, the downtrodden Cubs fans for however many years, like that we stuck around and we're in there for it. Like that was monumental, I would say.
Sure. And as we were talking about the Red Sox before, and when they lost in 86, and it's like, for the people that were diehard Red Sox fans, they were probably like, I wish we would have lost 100 games this year. Like, you don't even want to get that close and have a little roller up the first base line when Mookie Wilson hit it, it's like you would just rather not be so close because you get your hopes up so much.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, kind of along those lines, who's an athlete that you're super impressed by, like either in the past or now? Like, who's someone that impresses you that, or in the past you've been like, wow, that's amazing, like that person and their ability.
This is going to upset my wife. Sorry, Will. I'm going to jump in here.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
won't
I had
show
to think
her.
of somebody.
It's going to upset my wife, and I've been trying to quit him, but when I watch Tiger play,
Why would that upset her?
Oh, because he's a womanizer, and because of the way that he treated women, and
Got it.
I don't disagree for a second that it's reprehensible the way that he treated women and his wife, and
yeah.
But man, when I watch him play, it's just I've always felt like we were watching one of the greatest ever to do this, and the way that he fundamentally changed the game. To say nothing of the racial implications, but just the way that he had it all. He was one of the first golfers to drive 300 yards routinely. He could shape shots better than anyone. His iron play was crazy. He was a good putter, and the things he could do around the green were second to none. And I remember watching his first Masters win. I remember in 2005 when he made the shot on 16, when it rolled down and trickled in. And I still root for him every time he tees it up. And as much as I try not to, I can't quit him. So
it's funny. As Ken was describing that, there's only a couple of times where I have like kind of leapt off the couch in a sports moment that it was so exciting. I just found myself standing, and two of them were golf moments, but one in particular was when Tiger at the Masters, when that putt rolled in on, was it 16, 17?
The chip.
The
chip
chip
that rolled down the hill. Yeah, that was on 16. Yep.
On 16. I mean, I like, there'll never be a shot as great as that again. I mean, at the moment he needed it and how difficult it was. And so I think he's a machine, or was, and so, yeah, that was very impressive. It made me think of, I think somebody I would put in that category is Mariano Rivera. Like when he was, in those late 90s Yankees teams, I mean, this guy was automatic. And what I liked about him is that he would just strike you out and walk off the mound. I mean, he didn't pump his fist, stare at the batter. They all knew what was coming, and he would throw his
anything about it. Yep.
Cut fastball 3 times in a row, and they sat down, and and he just went to work, and it was. So I always liked about them that he didn't show up the other team. He was dominant, but he didn't let them know that he was, and he was like, I actually didn't know how deeply intense he was. And even in the clubhouse there, he would call out his teammates and things like that. And I never thought he was like that. I thought he just took care of his own business, but he was an intense competitor. But you didn't really see it on the mound. I mean, he just walked up, threw his pitches, and went to the dugout. And so I think that's a guy you can show your kids, and like, this is a professional.
Yeah.
I think somebody like Barry Sanders back in the day, and Holtz used to always use him as an example. Score your touchdown, hand the ball to the ref, and act like you'll be there again,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is important though with kids. I mean, to think about people that you can tell your kids, like, just watch this guy. Like, this is how you do it. And it's hard, it's hard again with Tiger to be that way.
Yeah.
but somebody like Mariano Rivera, as a hockey fan, as a Penguin fan, Sidney Crosby, Mario Lemieux, like the same kind of like, it's, you watch them and it's magical. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
there's no way that I could do what they do, and but I think, Will, it's a great point about Rivera, just sort of the humility that he displayed.
Mhm.
And he didn't talk the talk. All he did was walk the walk, and that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I will say that that's something that I tend to bring up on on these interviews within any format or any topic, is that one of my favorite qualities in people is humility and the ability to be like, I'm not the greatest ever. I'm not perfect. And I love that in athletes too. I think some of my favorite moments with particular athletes were, well, actually, the most recent one, I mean, watching the Masters this time around, Maria was watching with me. She golfs and stuff, and that shot by Cameron Smith, he had a shot out of the woods.
Yep.
And it went over the sand trap and rolled down and went around and came down like perfectly angled and was like a foot from the hole. And and I was like, Maria was kind of on her phone, she's 14. So and I said, Maria, you have to watch this. And I like took it back, and then she was like, wow. And I was like, right? Like that was impressive. Like, so I think anytime an athlete has to kind of do something out of the ordinary, like when those shots happen, like you're like, holy crap, I could never. I mean, sometimes I'm in the sand trap for like 3 swings, like so
Right.
to be able to be the kind of athlete, not just to hit off the tee and not just to putt in the hole from 10 feet away on the green, but to be the kind of athlete where if things go south and you can come back from that, that's the thing that impresses me the most, when they can do that. And I would say the other person that Will, you were talking about jump off the couch thing. I think watching, I mean, he had kind of a short career, but Kerry Wood with the Cubs, that was an exciting time. He had a lot of ability for a while there, and it was really fun to watch him.
So Rebecca was at the game in '98 when he struck out 20. Were you there, Karen?
I think
Emily was.
Yes, Emily was. I was at work.
Oh, well, someone had to work.
Yeah. Well, someone had to pay the rent. So.
Yeah, that's right.
No, someone had to pay for Emily's phone bill. No, I'm kidding. No, but I remember that they were there at that game. That was like,
well, it was May of '98, and of course
Mhm.
that '98 baseball season was so exciting with the home run chase.
Yeah.
And what a amazing time to live right near Wrigley. So
it was great. I mean, we were, like I said, we were like 3 houses up from the left field wall.
Yep.
On Kenmore.
Mm-hmm.
And then a friend of ours lived around the corner and had a rooftop house. So we got to go up and watch games from there a lot of times. You had to crawl through the window and like come out on the deck. And it's not there anymore. It's now like a giant condo, and they charge, $2,000 for
$100 a game. It's because I've done a couple of those rooftop games before. It's $100 a game.
Yeah.
To go up there. So
I would say worth it in a way. I mean, it's such an experience to do
awesome.
that. I mean, how many other places can you do that? But that's a great okay. So talking about that, two more things to talk about. Sports venues. Where have you been that you're like in awe of being in the venue? Like Fenway or Wrigley, or where have you been that you feel like is a great sports venue? Notre Dame.
Yeah. So I honestly haven't been, I feel like I haven't been to that many, so I've been to Wrigley and Fenway. Now I'm a little biased as a Yankee fan, but Fenway is like kind of unique and cool, but it really needs to be replaced. I mean, the place is falling apart. I mean, it's like, you're kind of taking your life in your hands, walking around the concourse, like a cinder block's going to fall on your head. But
as opposed to Yankee Stadium, where you take your life in your hands, just trying to get to the stadium.
Yes, that's true. Good point. I can walk to Fenway without fear for my life. But I actually went to Fenway to see Notre Dame play Boston College. So I will say it's a terrible place to watch a football game. But certainly one of the classic fields. One thing that sticks out, I mean, it's not really the venue, but I guess a moment when I was just really impressed with the atmosphere is when Ken and I were, of course, together for this trip when we went to University of Tennessee.
Yes.
And saw Tennessee play Notre Dame. And we had traveled to some places, like we went to Ohio State, University of Washington. We went to some loud stadiums, but I felt like I was at a pro field at Tennessee. And I guess I hadn't been at an SEC, field before, and all that went with it. And I was just blown away by that, like the atmosphere. I mean, the stadium is probably very average. It's not really that great, but I would say the atmosphere was just unlike anything I had experienced even when I was traveling with the team. So I would say SEC football stadiums or game day experiences. I only have one, so I've never been to Alabama or like Georgia. I'm sure those are probably even better, but it's they talk about those, and I think they're pretty true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great memory, and if you remember, Will, I think we were gonna get like a cab from our hotel to the stadium, and of course the cab didn't show up, so we're like, oh crap, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna get to the game? So these guys, it was like 3 or 4 guys, probably had one set of teeth between them. There's Julie.
Hi.
So
Hi,
these guys,
Julie.
They can't hear you because I'm on.
yeah.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
My
Sorry,
son
I'm just
needs
yelling in
something
your ears now. Sorry.
He needs something from his room, so
Okay, that's fine.
sorry.
We'll take care of this in post-production. But these 3 or 4 guys who had one set of teeth between them gave us a ride, and they're just like, they saw like we were wearing Notre Dame stuff or whatever, but they're like, hey, you guys need a ride? We're like, yeah, thanks so much. And I think they even gave us like a bottle of something. Who knows what was in it? I don't know if you can buy it in a store or not, but they were like super, super nice. And the stadium, the experience was awesome. It was a Saturday night ESPN game, so Kirk Herbstreit was there, and it was just so loud, and it was really, really awesome.
It's funny, like, sorry, Ken, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I remember that, getting the ride. I always tell people that story. And, if we did that in Ann Arbor or Columbus, like, they would probably kick us, or like these people were happy to do it. And they were chatting like, hey, where are you guys from? And stuff like that. We had this great conversation over the way to the stadium. And, they dropped us off. We were like, oh, hey, thanks, And I think we offered to give them money, and they were just like, no, have a great time. And even after the game, it helped. Tennessee blew out Notre Dame in that game.
It was their national championship year. Yeah.
Yes.
And then we went out in Knoxville after the game, still have our stuff on, and people couldn't have been nicer the whole night. It was really shocking, but very refreshing, I guess, for being in other, sort of Big Ten cities where that would not have happened.
And I took something from that. It really made me think, like, whenever I was back on campus at Notre Dame and I would see opposing fan bases, and I'm like, yeah, think about how to treat these people. Like, they're just here to see their team.
Mhm.
And I, I think we all know there's a lot more to Notre Dame than just the football team. And so I would go out of my way to be like, take a walk around campus, like go to the grotto, go to the basilica, see the quads. Like it's a beautiful campus. Take some time and enjoy your time while you're here. So that was a really good kind of thing that I took out of that trip. I mean, when I think of venues, and you're right, Will, like, I mean, we did get to see some incredible college football stadiums and experiences, but I still remember the first time that I saw green grass at a baseball stadium with natural grass, and it was at Wrigley. And I remember walking through, kind of coming through the concourse and seeing how green the grass was. Because I grew up in Pittsburgh going to games at Three River Stadium, which was all AstroTurf and looked just like Veterans Stadium and Riverfront Stadium and Busch Stadium. On the inside, like you would never know which one you were in. But when you see the natural grass at Wrigley, and I remember the first time I went to Yankee Stadium and I went with my dad, what a memory that was. Just to be there and just to think, like, I mean, this is the house that Ruth built. Like, I mean, it was before they moved to the new one. And so that's why, like, the history that is in some of these stadiums is just, stadia, is so incredible. And it was something that when we were at Notre Dame, like I tried to never take that for granted. What it was like to be able to kind of go down the stairs, run out the tunnel. And I considered myself to be very lucky to have a set of keys to the locker room, our senior year when we were managers. And so if I would see a little kid and his dad walking around and hanging out near the stadium, I'm like, hey, come on, let's go. Let's go take a walk here. Let's go do this. And I'd take them in, and they were like, holy cow. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Mhm.
Like, people should get to experience that stuff. So
yeah, I will leave you with one last question, thought pattern for us. When you experience sports in your house, like, are your kids into sports? Like, did you kind of pass that on, that love of sports? Or are you trying to pass that on, I guess?
I'm one for two. My older son loves it. He loves to play. He loves to watch. He loves to participate, and he talks. I mean, we were at church this morning having a conversation. He came over to tell me that Chase Claypool just had a long touchdown reception. Because he went to Notre Dame. He's like triple threat. He went to Notre Dame. He plays for the Steelers, and he's on both of our fantasy teams. And so he's like, I gotta interrupt this conversation to tell Dad. I'm like, okay, Mike, thanks. I'm talking. But so he's really into it. My younger son is just not. So that's fine. He's got his own interests, but
yeah. So my son is the oldest. He's 15, and then I have two girls. I would say my son is very into sports. I'm in his room now, and I can kind of look around, but you'll see, there's all the baseball team pennants over there. There's Eli Manning.
I thought that was Daniel Jones.
Yeah, it probably should be. But it's interesting, and Ken was talking about, what if their sons grow up to be Bears fans. So my son Ryan he's a Giants fan, like I am, but he's also a Phillies fan, and he's very into baseball. Played a lot of baseball growing up, and still plays in rec leagues and so forth. He's into the Sixers, so he's gravitated towards Philly teams, but except for the Giants. Now, Philly, as you know, as I mentioned before, is an Eagles town. So it's been an interesting experience for him. And I actually had this same conversation with my wife, and I was like, maybe I should let him become an Eagles fan because, it'd be more fun to talk about with his friends and things like that. But, kind of getting slightly off topic here, but one thing I found is that I don't think kids have the same, like, at least around here, like the same burning passion around their teams. And it might be because of fantasy football. But kids, I'm seeing kids will gravitate towards players more than teams. And so that's been my experience. So I laugh, like people I work with, I said, yeah, my son wore an Eli Manning jersey to work or to school today. And they're like, man, if he did that when I was growing up, like he wouldn't have left 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And he'll come home and I'll say, hey, anybody say anything to you about your jersey? He's like, yeah, not really. Like, really? Wow. So my girls, I would say they're not as into sports. My middle one, not really. She played some sports, but doesn't really care. Like they're not going to stay up late to watch a Notre Dame football game with me, where my son will. My youngest is probably more athletic. Like she likes playing sports more than my other daughter, but still kind of could care less, whether the Giants or anybody wins. They kind of like baseball, like they kind of like the Phillies, but that's about it.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of fun raising kids that that they kind of have an out of market team, like the Steelers. Like that's the thing that Mike and I have, like in this sea of Bears fans. Like we got the Steelers. That's this point of connection that we have, and it's kind of it's this us against the world mentality. That's it's kind of fun to foster that. But I don't know. It's a couple of years ago the Pirates were playing the Cubs in the wild card game for the playoffs, and they had like a blue and red day at school, and I'm like, bullshit. So I sent both kids in Pirates gear, and one of Mike's teachers made him change it. I'm like, that's crazy. Like,
what?
Come on. So don't roll my eyes at that, obviously, but yeah. So
that's horrible.
I think that like us against the world feeling is, it's kind of cool to have that connection with your kids.
Yeah. Our daughters, as much as I try, I will say that they're always happy when we're happy when somebody wins. But Maria told me once, so John watches like sumo wrestling sometimes from Japan, and she'll sit down and she'll watch that. And then what was like the Tour de France one year when she was like 10, she sat down and watched it the whole time. And I was like, how many hours have you guys been watching the Tour de France? Like, but she won't watch football. And she said once, she goes, well, the Tour de France was fun because they were biking the whole time, and football, it's like
stops.
Yes. Yeah. They like do something and then it's like 5 minutes and then they do something. So I thought that was an interesting perspective because I never really thought about it like that, where I think like Tour de France sounds completely boring to me. Like, I mean, Will, were you with us when we saw it in person in Paris?
No.
I think maybe Rob and I went over and like saw it in person, but before we left. But it was exciting in person because it's like a parade. They do all this stuff and they hand out like flags and all this stuff, and then the bikers go by and it's exciting. But watching it on TV, I was like, really, like, this is more exciting to you than football. But then it was just kind of a cool sports perspective. Like, I was like, oh, well, yeah, you're right. Like, so I'm like, you need to watch where they replay it on the, uh, as like one of the channels replays it and they condense the football game
Yeah.
into like an hour, and
Yes.
you're like, it's like, do, play.
Yep.
And I'm like, that's how she would probably prefer to watch it. But
It's so interesting that you brought up the Tour de France, because I went to a NASCAR. I never went to a race, but I was in Darlington, South Carolina, and it was the weekend when they were having the race there, and I went to like some of the time trials, I guess, the day before the big race, and I remember sitting in the stands, and I'm like, ooh, I can kind of see how people can get into this, and I'm not a car guy or anything like that, but it was pretty cool to watch it, and I can only imagine what it's like to see like a whole a whole
yeah,
whatever you call it, fleet of cars,
yeah.
trading paint and and doing all that stuff. 'Cause it's pretty exciting to see it, but I mean, to watch it on TV, no, thank you. So
Yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah, I think the difference between seeing something live and on TV is huge. And there's some sports that hockey, I'm not huge on watching on TV, but going to a hockey game, I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite things to go see in person. But on TV, I'm kind of like, like, I don't know. So yeah, there's a difference with those.
I think 2020 was a good year to test like how big of a sports fan you were,
Yes.
or how much withdrawal you were going through in like April, May. And I found myself watching, like, the ESPN ran this like Ocho Day.
Yeah, the Ocho.
They did,
Yeah.
they did like seed spitting competitions, and like how fast you get up like greased stairs and things like that.
And cornhole's on all the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
anyway,
I found myself watching bull riding. Like, I'm like, I just need something,
Yeah.
some competition.
There was, when the kids were younger, there was one Saturday morning when I woke up and bowling was on. And so we started watching bowling. And we watched like 2 or 3 matches, like not 2 or 3 frames, but 2 or 3 matches. And of course we started like talking trash and all that stuff, but it is kind of like, yeah, whatever's on, I'll watch it.
It was yeah. When the knitting competition comes on, then we know we're really in the dregs. So
yeah,
there was one that was an electrician competition where you had to see how quickly the electricians could like hook up a certain circuit pattern on a door or something. And we were watching, like, what am I doing?
I'll tell you, the lumberjack competitions, those are fun to watch. I'm
Yes, those are good.
Those are fun to watch.
When they cut the cookies or whatever they call it, like off the log, like that's my favorite.
Like,
just like zzz, zzz, zzz.
Yep.
Oh, thank you guys. This was fun.
It was super fun.
I feel like we covered every sport possible, so it works.
So. We got seed spitting, so
yes, I didn't think that would make it in.
Just under the wire. Thanks, you guys.